Well, good morning again. I hope everybody's doing well today. You know, it's official. This is our first Sunday of church that's actually in spring, and so I hope that means we're going to get some nice weather. We had an incredible day yesterday, but I need like several days like that strung out together. I'm ready for spring. I'm sure that many of you guys are too. I really This is one of the things I love about being in the Midwest is the seasons. I love the change of the seasons. You know, right now there's kind of this anticipation for spring, and then we know like, oh, it's going to be spring and things are going to bloom, and then it's going to be warm this summer, and I just didn't really get that when I lived in California or Florida. There were no seasons. There wasn't that sense of anticipation, and I think that there are times where we can actually appreciate this sense of anticipation. See, as a church, we're in a season of anticipation right now, and we call it Lent, right? Lent is the 40 days or the 6 weeks before Easter. And it's a time where we are anticipating the celebration of Christ's resurrection as we reflect throughout these 6 weeks on his sacrifice. Now, this Lent, we're spending these 40 days of Lent, these 40 days before Easter, and we're focusing on this idea of participating ourselves in these acts of kindness and generosity, right? We're calling it 40 acts, and each week we've been encouraging you to do one or two of these kindness prompts throughout the week, and then we said that we'd share some of those experiences that you've had if you shared a picture and hashtagged it PCC 40 Acts. And so last week you were encouraged to do one or two of these things. The first thing was to write some kind of note of thanks and encouragement to our first responders or public workers. And then the other thing was that we challenged you to give a gift card to your cashier, just like any random cashier, buy a gift card and then hand it right back to them. And so let's see what some of you guys shared this week. So this one was sending a get well card to our boss. This is Micah. All right, Micah bought a coffee and then gave a gift card to the lady that gave it to him. This was a kids ministry. Okay, paper or plastic, double plastic. Nice play on words there, Steve. Gave it to the shop. This was actually our men's group that meets on Wednesday mornings. Our men's small group. That's the woman who makes all of our coffees every morning. So she got a gift card handed back. A lot of gift cards this week. All right, that was Sam that gave a gift card. That's really cool. It says, today on my Starbucks run, I picked up a little something for my cashier. If you could read the rest, because you can't click more on that screen, it talks about how like she couldn't wipe the smile off her face. So that's really neat. And then this was the security guard at work. We'll count that as a public worker for sure. Someone keeping us safe. What else do we have? Any of them? Oh, okay. She didn't want her picture taken, but there's the favorite pizza girl. All right. Yes. I put this up here. This was actually from a group in our church that, if you guys remember, a while ago there was some tables out front, and you could give and donate to things that we could send to the troops overseas, people from our church and friends and family of church members, and then also first responders. And so they actually took a lot of what you guys gave, and they went to the fire station and police station here in Palos Park and did that this week. So that's pretty cool. That was me and my wife yesterday. We had to buy Evan some new shoes. Check out those new kicks in the background. And so I told the lady, I was like, working at a shoe store, you probably like shoes. So here. And she's like, oh, you didn't have to do that. I was like, well, that's kind of the point. I didn't have to. So that's the last one. Yeah. I always got to end on the pastor. Thanks for doing that one for me. Sheesh. So this week, the prompts for you during our 40 Acts challenge are these two things. Number one, if you can think of how you can give some type of a gift that will bless a single parent. So find a single parent in your life and do something that will bless a single parent. And then also, I want to encourage everybody to talk with your family about what Easter means to you. Okay? Talk with your family about what Easter means to you, even if you got to do it over the phone to the grandkids. Talk to your family about what Easter means to you. Now, I know that for some of you, this whole hashtag thing, taking pictures and hashtagging it on social media, I know that it's not your thing. That's totally okay. But please, we still want you, and we want to encourage you to to still do it, still participate in these prompts that we're giving you, even if you don't use this hashtag PCC 40 Acts thing. And the reason that we're doing this is not just so that you can take a picture and then hashtag it and be like, okay, cool, I did it. The idea is that we want you throughout these 40 days, right? That's the 40 Acts part. We want you throughout these 40 days leading up to Easter to think beyond yourself, right? We need to get beyond ourselves during the season of Lent with these different acts of kindness and generosity. And I want us to all try and keep at the front of our minds what our mission is as a church, right? To live like Christ, to love like Christ, so that others can know Christ. This is that part where we're trying to live like Christ, to be generous and kind so that other people will see him through us. And these hashtag prompts that we're using, they're just one way that we can do that and try to see how others in our church are doing it throughout the week. So have fun with these. Don't if you don't do the hashtag thing, then feel free to share with me what your experience was. You know, the group that did the first responders here in Palos Park, they're like, I don't know how to do that whole hashtag thing, but can I email you a picture? I was like, sure, I'll throw it up on my social media and I'll look cool about it. So I had like all my friends at my church in Florida like, oh, awesome, Steve. I'm like, no, I didn't do that. That was people in my church. But so just even if you don't do that, just tell me about it. I'd love to hear your experiences of following these kind of kindness and generosity prompts throughout this. Now, along with this challenge of PCC 40 Acts and the whole hashtag thing, we're in a sermon series in the book of Acts, and we're calling it Back to the Start. It was the very start of the Christian church. And so we're spending Lent working through the early church, and we're looking at some of the experiences and some of the challenges that the early church had. And so far, we've seen how the apostles were brave even in the face of extreme persecution, and how they didn't lose that zeal for Christ, right? They were able to persist because they were clear about what their mission was. And they knew that their mission was to spread the gospel. We also saw how the early church was unified. They were united as the body of Christ. Last week, we actually talked about how the church dealt with conflict, those first problems that the church experienced, right? And we learned how the church used the gifts of others within the body to serve the church. Now, this week, we're going to see how these new Christians in a growing church handle some really unexpected change and an environment that was hostile toward them. And so we're gonna see how the early Christians in the early church, how they trusted God when life was anything but comfortable. You know, I don't know, I'm sure that you can all probably nod your head along with this when I say, have you ever found yourself in a situation that was not at all what you had expected or envisioned for your future? You've probably all been there. I know I've been there so many different times. And as I was reading this passage and preparing for this week, one of the ones that popped into my mind the most was this thing. It was probably 1996, and I was helping out as a volunteer in a church youth group. Now, it happened to be that I was volunteering in a church youth group where my girlfriend, Katie, who's now my wife, we'd been dating for several years, and she was actually on staff at the church as the youth director. Right? So she was the student ministry director, and I was just volunteering for that youth group. And now, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I was the greatest volunteer this world has ever seen. It's not at all what is true. No, if I'm going to be honest with you, I was a horrible youth ministry volunteer. It wasn't that I was unreliable. I was extremely reliable. I was always there. I was always on time. I was always ready to go. I was signed up for every event and every weekend retreat and camp and mission trip. I was really reliable. Here's the problem. I was also extremely disruptive. It was bad. I was in my early 20s, and I hadn't grown up at all yet, and I loved to make people laugh. The problem was I just didn't know when to be serious and when it was okay to goof around. So every time Katie was trying to be serious at youth group, like actually teach something about Jesus that mattered, I'm over there like cracking jokes and getting all the kids distracted, and so that was not just like something that happened every now and then. That was really, who I was in youth ministry. I just loved to goof around, and I didn't know when to be serious. And so one day, my girlfriend at the time, Katie, she had had enough. And so we went out to dinner, and so she had a talk with me again about how disruptive I was in youth group. This time, though, instead of giving me another chance, she told me that she thought, she said, Steve, I think you should actually think about getting a job as a youth director at another church. You should lead your own youth ministry. That's pretty smart, actually, right? Like, instead of her coming out and saying, Steve, you got to go, she was like, Steve, I see so much leadership potential in you that I just don't want to keep that all to myself. I think we should share that with another church. And so I told her, I was like, okay, sounds good. I'll pray about it, right? Pray about it, which meant I was not going to pray about it because I didn't really want to be on staff at a church. I didn't want to be in full-time ministry. I didn't want to be a student ministries director. So I was like, yeah, I'll pray about it. And then I wasn't going to pray about it at all. Well, God had other plans. And so after that dinner, we stopped by the church office where Katie worked. And she's like, I just need to check my mail. This was back when we actually got mail instead of everything digital. So she's like, I got to check my box. And so she checks her box and she's flipping through stuff and she sees a letter from another local church in town. And she tears it open and she's reading it. I'm just kind of standing there waiting for her. And what was interesting is that in her mail was this letter from another local church looking for a youth director. See, they were actually wondering if Katie knew anybody that she thought she could recommend, anybody that she thought might be interested in this new position. And so with a smile on her face, Katie, she handed me this letter from this church, and she said, here you go. God answered your prayer, which I hadn't prayed yet. And then she added, you're fired. That's true, guys. You can fire volunteers. Just let that be known to you, right? See, I didn't really want to be a youth director yet. So I thought. I didn't want to stop volunteering for Katie. I mean, if I'm being honest, I had it pretty good. I didn't have any of the responsibility. I didn't have any of the weight of leading a student ministry. I just got to go have fun with teenagers. And so I didn't really think I wanted to be a youth director, but I was like, well, okay, I'll go interview. So I actually interviewed for this job at another church, and they gave me the job. I was like, wait, I'm not sure I've even prayed about this yet. But it ended up being a great decision. You see, I could have been upset at Katie, and I could have been upset with God for moving me, for sort of forcing me out into something new and something uncomfortable and something very different than what I thought my future was going to hold. I was happy at the time. I was comfortable, but I let God move me, and I let Him use me, and the rest is history. And so essentially what I'm saying is it's Katie's fault that I'm your pastor. Our passage today, though, it shows that we can always be a part of God's plan, wherever we are located. So we can bloom, if you will, and find ways to serve God in whatever area we live and work if we will just trust Him. This is one of the reasons that we're doing this hashtag PCC40 Act stuff. I'm trying to get us all to think about our everyday life, to see where it is that we can all allow God to step in and to use our unique and different situations to bless somebody else. This stuff can even be applied when life's painful, when we go through painful situations. My story that I just shared, it wasn't really one of pain, but some of our stories are. But when we will trust God with our pain and allow God to use it, see, He can give purpose to something that was meant to harm and meant to destroy. In the passage that Jill read for us today, every believer except for the apostles has been displaced, right? Because of the persecution that was taking place. So think about this. They had all been uprooted because of their belief in Christ. And now they fear that they will be imprisoned for their belief in Christ. And it says that Saul, Saul, he's a religious leader in the Jewish church, and Saul is on a rampage. And these new Christ followers are scattered. And we see from the passage that these new followers of Jesus, they didn't let their situation stop them. Rather, they allowed God to use them to spread the good news farther and farther. See, preaching and proclaiming wherever they went, even though some of them found themselves in prison for doing it. You know, this passage that we read today, it begins immediately after the death of a guy named Stephen, and Stephen becomes the first Christian martyr. And we're going to be looking at Stephen a couple weeks from now. We'll look a little deeper into that. But it seems like from today's passage that Stephen's death is a catalyst for this great persecution that broke out against the church. Acts chapter 8, verse 3 says, "But Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison." See, the persecutors were relentless, right? They were resentful of the success that the apostles had been having. And so they resolved to put a stop to this movement. They wanted to stop the progress of these Jesus believers, of the early Christian church. And what we see here in Scripture is that both men and women were persecuted and imprisoned. The phrase that was in Scripture that says dragged off, that Paul dragged them off, it quite literally means to drag as if by their hair. It implies a brutal form of treatment. And so this picture that we have of Saul, who's going after the Christians, it's not a pleasant one. The word translated as destroy, when it says, "But Saul began to destroy the church," is the same word that's used in Psalm chapter 80, verse 13, that describes a wild boar ravaging a vineyard. That's what Saul was doing, is destroying the church. And all of these new Christians, they're now scattered and scared. But how do they respond? Right? Do they hide out of fear? Do they hide out of fear of being the next martyr? They just saw Stephen, who was killed because of his faith. Do they hide out of fear of being the next martyr? No. See, verse 4 tells us, those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. So the neighboring towns not only became places of refuge, they were places where the gospel then was heard for the first time. The Christians were scattered like seeds, but wherever they fell, they sprouted. And we, you and I, like these new Christians that we're reading about in Acts, we need to live with that same passion. This is your first fill in the blank. We need to live with the same passion to share Christ wherever God plants us. All of us should have the same passion in life, to share Christ wherever God plants us. See, these Christians were neither commissioned to go and preach, nor were they especially trained to do so, but they were full of faith in Jesus. And they were full of thankfulness for the love that he had already shown them. And so their preaching was this natural overflow of their hearts. Now, I know that I've been challenging all of you. I've been challenging us as a church. I've been challenging you to tell your story of faith. Let people know why your faith is so important to you. And I can't stress enough the importance of your individual and unique story, your faith experience. You know, people who don't go to church, they don't care about what I have to say. Right? People who don't go to church aren't searching the internet for Payless Community Church and trying to watch that sermon video. What's that pastor have to say? But your friends and your family members and your coworkers, they care about why you believe. You know, Matthew chapter 12:34, Jesus said that the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And these Christians, they didn't let their situation stop them, but they shared Christ wherever they went because their hearts were so full. See, in the same way, these new Christians were the ones that affected and influenced all of the areas that they were in. Whatever area they went to, they were having an impact. And you can affect and influence the place that God has you. You know, for the past 5 weeks or so, my wife Katie and I have really had the pleasure of having 14 or 15 20-somethings from our church in our home for a small group that we're leading. And we decided to title the small group for 20-somethings, Help, I'm a Christian in My 20s. We're extremely impressed with this group of young people in this church. See, the transparency and the honest discussions that we're having as a group is actually really refreshing for Katie and I. We're learning through talking with them that, living out your faith as a 20-something, when most of your friends don't really understand why it's important, they don't really understand why it matters so much, we're learning that this isn't easy. But we've got a group of young people here at this church who truly desire to live a life that honors God. They're ready to admit their struggles. And at the same time, they've got this strong desire to be a positive example of what a loving Christian looks like. See, our young adults here at PCC are up to the challenge of affecting and influencing those in their life with the message of Christ. And see, I believe that their story, their unique and individual story, shared with those that they encounter day in and day out, is much more effective than anything that I could share with those people. And from our passage today, we see specifically how Philip shared the message of Christ. And he shared it powerfully. Now, if you remember, we talked a little bit about Philip last week. He was one of those men that was chosen with the need that they had to do the daily distribution of food, especially to the widows. And he was one of those men that we talked about last week that was chosen to go and take care of one of those needs in the early church. He was an everyday man, but he allowed God to use him. And his story was something that he was willing to let God use to impact and influence other people. And so here we actually see him scattered. He's scattered like the other Christians when they start to receive that persecution. They're all basically kicked out of the city. They all run and they go to different areas. And so Philip ends up in a place called Samaria. Samaria was a region that was despised by the Jews. But we see in this passage today that didn't stop Philip. And because he didn't let his situation, right, being in a place that he despised in terms of the cultural stuff, when he grew up, it was like, ooh, Samaria. And knowing that the Samaritans too kind of looked, ooh, that's Philip, he's a Jew. He didn't let that situation stop him. And because of that, the Samaritans then received the message of Jesus eagerly and with joy. It says in Acts 8:5, it says, Philip went down to a city in Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah there. When the crowds heard Philip and saw the signs that he performed, they all paid close attention to what he said. For with shrieks, impure spirits came out of many, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was great joy in that city. See, it says crowds listened to him and they came to faith. He went to a city in Samaria, proclaiming the gospel and performing miracles. And the miracles were an evidence that the truth, that his message was true. The miracles were proof that this was God that was behind this message. And it says there was great joy. I mean, imagine people that had been possessed by evil spirits. Imagine people that had been paralyzed and they're all now healed. There's great joy because of these healings and the conversions to Christ and the joy that family and friends are experiencing as more and more people are coming to be saved. What motivated the early Christians to preach the gospel so purposely? See, I believe that they were determined. Here's your second fill in the blank. I believe they were determined to be the influence of Christ and not be influenced by the world. To be the influence of Christ and not be influenced by the world. It's good for all of us to assess whether we are the ones that are influencing for good from the places that we're in, or are we being influenced instead? How can we serve the communities and the neighborhoods that we've been placed in? And whether you're somewhere for a short term, we have people, you go off to college and it's a short term. You get an internship, it's a short term. Maybe you've got a job that is just going to be a short term thing. Or maybe you're in it for the long haul, right? You're in your career, you just bought a house, you put down roots. It doesn't matter if it's short-term or long-term. We can make a difference in people's lives. Even if we dislike where we currently are, we can still ask God for opportunities to serve and to grow. If you're somewhere where you'd rather not be, ask God to help you to grow, to love your surroundings, or at least to love the people that are in your path. So this is where we need to make sure that our vision and our understanding, our vision is clear. The vision that we have here for us as a church, and this, the vision that should be understood by all of us, is that we understand that the church doesn't exist for us. We're the church, and we exist to impact our world with the love and message of Jesus Christ. Everyone, every day, everywhere. See, if we can remember that, then we can have a better chance at blooming wherever we've been planted, right? We may need to remind ourselves daily that the church doesn't exist for me, but I am the church. And I exist to impact the world with the love and message of Jesus Christ. What a great reminder to start our day with. But see, if we're honest, we all have it pretty easy. We, for the most part, have comfortable lives. And so perhaps we don't feel the urgency to share Christ. Persecution always seems to produce the opposite result that it intended. Our passage today, it actually shows the church expanding instead of being subdued. But most of us don't experience persecution. And so it's easy for us to become complacent. I looked up the definition of complacent. It's awful. It says, showing smug or uncritical satisfaction with oneself or one's achievements. Uncritical satisfaction with oneself. Some synonyms would be self-satisfied, pleased with oneself, proud of oneself, self-approving, self-congratulatory, self-admiring, and self-regarding. That's what complacency is. You see a trend? Right? As Christians, we're supposed to die to self. But when we become complacent, it looks an awful lot like self has become the focus. Are we too complacent? Are we too self-focused about sharing the gospel? Because we don't seem to have that same sense of urgency. And so how do we overcome this complacency? How do we overcome our inaction? Here's the third fill in the blank, and this is this. We must have a clear mission and vision. We have to have a clear mission and vision. See, we may not experience the kind of persecution for our faith that we're talking about from the early church in the book of Acts. But does your heart break for those that are in your life, your friends, family, coworkers, neighbors? Does your heart break for those that are believing the lie that this life is all there is? Right? When you see family and friends trying to cram in as much worldly comfort into their lives, right? To cram in all this comfort in this search for peace and purpose. Don't you long to tell them about the one who can provide peace that passes all understanding? What's stopping you? What stops us? See, you and I, we all have this amazing opportunity to live like Christ, to love like Christ, so that others can know Christ. And we do that when we start to love irrationally, when we serve selflessly, when we give generously, and when we grow continuously, and when we do those things all for the purpose of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. And so I want to encourage you, I want to challenge you to continue during this season of Lent to live with a sense of anticipation and a sense of reflection on what Christ did for us, both in his death and in his resurrection. And that maybe we could seek each day to live out our faith wherever it is that God has planted us. Would you pray with me?